In the biting Moscow winter, where the wind sliced through coats like a knife through butter, Ivan stood at the bus stop, his breath clouding in the frigid air. His worn boots shuffled against the snow-dusted pavement, hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his faded jacket. The city hummed around him, cars honking, neon signs flickering, the distant clatter of the metro, but here, at this lonely stop on a dimly lit street, time felt frozen. His eyes stung from the cold, but they caught on her. A woman, slight and shivering, clutching a thin scarf to her chest as if it could shield her from the -20 chill. Her face was pale, lips faintly blue, and her eyes darted toward the empty road, searching for a bus that wasn't coming. Ivan didn't know her story, didn't need to. He saw her trembling and felt a pang in his chest, sharp as the wind. Without a second thought, he shrugged off his jacket, the only thing keeping him warm, and held it out to her. "Take it," he said, his voice rough but kind, the words curling into the air like smoke. She hesitated, eyes wide, as if kindness from a stranger was a foreign language. But the cold was a cruel negotiator, and she accepted, wrapping the oversized jacket around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of tobacco and engine oil, but it was warm, and she sank into it with a quiet sigh. Ivan, now in just a threadbare sweater, shoved his hands back into his pockets and turned his gaze to the horizon, pretending the cold didn't bite. They stood in silence, two strangers bound by a small act of humanity in a city that often forgot such things existed. Her name was Elena, though Ivan wouldn't learn that until later. To him, she was just a woman who needed help, another soul weathering Moscow's endless winter. To her, he was a stranger with kind eyes and a jacket too big for his frame, a man who looked like he'd seen hard days but hadn't let them harden his heart. She didn't tell him she was Elena Petrova, CEO of one of Russia's largest tech firms, a woman whose name graced headlines and boardrooms. She didn't mention the chauffeured car that had broken down a mile away, leaving her stranded, or the meetings she'd missed with investors who could make or break her company's next quarter. In that moment, she was just a woman, cold and vulnerable, and his jacket was a lifeline. The bus never came. After 20 minutes, Elena broke the silence. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice soft but steady, her English accented but flawless. She'd noticed his calloused hands, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way he stood with a quiet resilience. "Why did you?" Ivan shrugged, his breath puffing out in a cloud. "You were cold. I had a jacket." His simplicity disarmed her. In her world of calculated moves and corporate chess, his answer was a checkmate of sincerity. She studied him, this man who looked like he belonged to the city's underbelly, maybe a mechanic, maybe a laborer, but whose eyes held a depth she couldn't quite place. "I'm Elena," she said finally, extending a gloved hand. He took it, his grip firm despite the cold. "Ivan," he replied, and for a moment, their hands lingered, a small warmth in the freezing night. She wanted to say more, to ask about him, but headlights cut through the darkness. A sleek black car pulled up, not the bus, but her driver, finally arrived. She hesitated, then slipped off the jacket, handing it back to him. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying a weight Ivan didn't understand. She climbed into the car, and it vanished into the neon-lit streets. Ivan thought that was the end of it. A small kindness, a fleeting moment. He went back to his life, days at the auto shop, nights in a cramped apartment where the heater rattled but never warmed. He didn't know that. Elena couldn't forget him. In her glass-walled office overlooking Moscow's skyline, she replayed that night. The jacket, his unassuming kindness, the way he'd given without expecting anything in return. It gnawed at her. She'd built her empire on strategy, on seeing opportunities where others saw none. But Ivan's act wasn't strategy, it was something purer, something she hadn't encountered in years. She found him through sheer determination. A private investigator, a few discreet inquiries, and soon she had his name, Ivan Kuznetsov, 34, a mechanic with a modest life and a past he didn't talk about. Elena learned he'd once been a soldier, had served in Chechnya, and came back quieter, carrying ghosts he never shared. He lived alone, sent money to his mother in a village outside Moscow, and spent his evenings reading tattered books by lamplight. The more she learned, the more she wanted to know him, not as a CEO, but as Elena, the woman who'd stood shivering at a bus stop. She tracked him to his shop, a grimy garage on the city's edge where engines roared and sparks flew. Dressed in a simple coat, no trace of her corporate armor, she walked in, her heart pounding. Ivan was under a car, wrench in hand, grease smudged on his cheek. He didn't recognize her at first, not until she spoke. "You gave me your jacket," she said, and his eyes widened, the wrench stilling in his hand. They talked. At first, it was awkward, her polished words clashing with his blunt ones. But there was an ease to him, a lack of pretense that drew her in. She told him she worked in tech, leaving out the part where she ran a billion-ruble company. He told her about the shop, about fixing things because it made sense to him, putting broken pieces back together. They met again, then again, coffee turning into walks through snowy parks, their conversations growing deeper. She told him about her childhood in a small town, how she'd clawed her way to the top, how success sometimes felt like a cage. He told her about the war, the friends he'd lost, the nightmares that still woke him. They were opposites, she, a titan of industry, he, a man who fixed cars, but their shared humanity bridged the gap. Alina's world began to shift. In boardrooms, she found herself distracted, thinking of Ivan's laugh, the way his eyes crinkled when he told a story. She started questioning her priorities, her relentless pursuit of power, the deals that left her empty. Ivan, too, felt the change. Alina's presence brought color to his gray days, her sharp mind and quiet vulnerability pulling him out of his solitude. But he sensed she was holding something back, something big. He didn't push, trust, he knew, took time. The truth came out by accident. A news article on his phone, a photo of Elena at a gala, the headline proclaiming her Russia's tech titan. Ivan stared at it, the pieces clicking into place, her polished speech, the car that had whisked her away. He confronted her, not angry but confused, standing in the snow outside her favorite cafe. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice low. "Did you think I wouldn't care who you are?" Alina's throat tightened. "I didn't want to be the CEO with you," she said. "I wanted to be me." She told him how his kindness had shaken her, how it reminded her of a world beyond profit margins and power plays. "You gave me your jacket, Ivan. You didn't know me, didn't want anything from me. Do you know how rare that is?" He looked at her, snow catching in her hair, and saw not the CEO but the woman who'd stood shivering at a bus stop. "I don't care about your title," he said. "I care about you." It was the closest he'd come to saying what had been growing in his heart, and it hit her like a wave. She stepped closer, her breath visible in the cold, and kissed him. It was tentative at first, then fierce, a collision of two worlds that shouldn't have fit but did. Their relationship deepened, but the world wasn't kind to such unions. Alina's board disapproved, whispering about optics, about a CEO dating a mechanic. Her rivals used it as ammunition, spinning stories of her, slumming it. Ivan faced his own battles, friends who didn't understand, a landlord who raised his rent, as if the universe itself resented their connection. Yet they held on, their bond forged in that first act of kindness, unbreakable even as the pressures mounted. The climax came at Alina's company gala, a glittering event in a Moscow ballroom where Russia's elite sipped champagne under chandeliers. She'd invited Ivan, half expecting him to decline. But he came, in a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit, his rough hands out of place among manicured ones. The room buzzed with whispers as they entered together, Elena in a sleek gown, Ivan at her side, unapologetic. A rival CEO, Dmitry Volkov, cornered her, his smile venomous. "Slumming it, Elena. What's next? Trading your office for a garage?" The room went quiet, all eyes on them. Elena felt the weight of her world, years of fighting to be taken seriously, to prove a woman could lead. She could have deflected, laughed it off, protected her empire. Instead, she took Ivan's hand, her voice steady. "This man gave me his jacket when I was freezing, when he had nothing to gain. That's worth more than any deal you'll ever make, Dmitry." The room held its breath, and Ivan, who'd always felt small in her world, stood taller. He squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with pride, not for himself but for her. The moment shifted something in Elena. She began to change her company, prioritizing projects that helped people, affordable tech for rural schools, support for veterans like Ivan. It wasn't easy, profits dipped, shareholders grumbled. But she was done chasing numbers at the expense of her soul. Ivan, inspired by her, started teaching free mechanics classes to kids in his neighborhood, showing them how to fix what was broken, just as he'd always done. Years later, they stood at that same bus stop, now a memory they visited each winter. The city had changed, new buildings, new faces, but the cold was the same, and so was their love. Elena, still a CEO but no longer defined by it, leaned into Ivan, his jacket around her shoulders once more. "You changed my life," she whispered. He smiled, his breath mingling with hers in the frosty air. "You were cold," he said. "I had a jacket." Their story spread, not just in Moscow but across Russia and beyond, whispered in cafes and shared online. It wasn't about a CEO and a mechanic, it was about kindness, about seeing the human behind the title, the heart behind the scars. In a world often cold and divided, their love was a reminder: sometimes, a single act of humanity can warm the soul of a city, a country, a world.